The morning arrived without drama. No sirens, no shouting, just a pale stretch of dawn settling over a building that had stopped breathing. The Ellison Grand stood sealed behind polished metal barriers, its glass doors locked for the first time in decades. Yellow tape cut across the entrance like a line that could not be crossed again. Beyond it, reporters waited in clusters, murmuring into phones, adjusting cameras, whispering guesses they did not yet understand. No one was allowed inside. No one was invited to speak. Inside the lobby, the silence was complete. The chandeliers were still lit, casting soft light over marble floors that no longer echoed with footsteps. The concierge desk stood abandoned, computer screens dark, nameplates neatly aligned as if their owners might return any second. Bell carts waited in perfect rows, frozen mid-purpose. The scent of polished wood and fresh linen lingered, unchanged, indifferent. Dr. Maya Ellison stood alone near the center of the lobby, her coat folded over one arm, her bag resting at her feet. She had not slept. It showed not in her posture, but in the stillness of it. The kind of stillness that came after motion had already done its damage. This place had once felt alive to her, not just familiar, but personal. Every curve of the staircase, every pane of glass in the atrium ceiling. She had approved them all years ago, believing that careful design could create something gentler than the world outside. A place where order meant safety, where professionalism meant fairness. Now it felt like a museum to a life that no longer existed. A security officer cleared his throat from across the room, then thought better of it. He shifted his weight, eyes fixed on the floor. The remaining staff stood in small groups along the walls, hands clasped, back straight, saying nothing. They looked like guests at a wake, unsure who was supposed to speak first. Maya let her gaze travel slowly, deliberately. The check-in counter, the elevators, the long hallway leading to the conference rooms upstairs. Spaces she had walked through hundreds of times without thinking. Spaces that now felt as if they had quietly rejected her. She realized then that something had already ended. Not officially, not on paper, but in a way that could not be reversed. Only minutes. That was all it had taken, a handful of ordinary minutes, nothing that should have mattered, nothing that should have been final. And yet, somewhere in those minutes, a door had closed that would never open again. Her phone buzzed softly in her hand. She did not look at it. Outside, a producer gestured animatedly toward the doors, frustration written across his face. Another reporter rehearsed a line under her breath, searching for the right tone to describe something she did not yet understand. The public wanted a story. They always did. A beginning. A villain. A clean explanation. There would be none of that today. Maya exhaled slowly and took one last look around. This was the space where decisions had once felt clear, where authority had seemed solid, where respect had been assumed rather than negotiated. Now it felt hollow, as if the walls themselves were waiting to hear what excuse would be offered for what could no longer be undone. She did not feel angry. That surprised her. What she felt instead was the heavy, sinking certainty of arrival, as if everything before this moment had been moving toward it without her noticing. As if the ending had been written quietly, patiently, and had finally decided it was time. The security officer stepped forward at last. "Ma'am, we're ready when you are." Maya nodded, though she was no longer sure what ready meant. As she turned toward the exit, the lights behind her dimmed automatically, responding to a system that did not know it was lighting a goodbye. The doors opened without ceremony, cameras lifted, voices stirred. She stepped out into the morning air, leaving the silence behind. Some mistakes announced themselves loudly. Others take only minutes. And by the time you realize what they have taken from you, there is nothing left to argue with. Maya Ellison had always believed that order was a form of protection. It was a belief she had earned, not inherited. Years of classrooms that smelled like old books and ambition. Courtrooms where tone mattered as much as truth. Boardrooms where calm voices outlasted loud ones. She had learned early that systems rewarded those who understood them and punished those who did not. Rules were not perfect, but they were predictable. And predictability, she believed, was power. That was why she came alone. No assistance, no advance notice, no polished arrival. Just a navy dress, sensible heels, and a rolling suitcase light enough to carry herself. She checked in under her maiden name, paid with her personal card, and asked for nothing special. The goal was not comfort. It was clarity. Rumors had reached her quietly, the way uncomfortable truths always did. A board member's offhand comment. An HR report closed too quickly. A guest complaint resolved with a refund instead of an explanation. None of it dramatic, all of it plausible. So she came the way the system asked her to. Calm, proper, anonymous. If something was wrong, it would reveal itself. Daniel Wright believed the same thing. He stood behind the front desk with his shoulders squared and his suit pressed sharp enough to suggest discipline. 15 years in luxury hospitality had taught him how to read a room before it spoke. He knew the difference between guests who mattered and guests who required management. He knew policy. He knew procedure. And more importantly, he knew how to enforce both without raising his voice. To Daniel, the hotel was a machine, and he was the one keeping it from breaking down. When he noticed the woman approaching the desk, he did what he always did. A quick assessment. Mid-40s, professional, no visible staff with her. Confident posture, but not demanding. She did not look lost. She did not look impressed either. That registered. "Good morning," he said, polite but restrained. "Good morning," Maya replied. "I have a reservation." Her voice was steady, educated, neutral. She slid her ID forward without being asked. He noticed the doctorate title but did not linger on it. Titles were common. Entitlement was not. As he pulled up the reservation, a small alert flashed on the screen. A duplicate charge. Minor. Happens all the time. The policy was clear. There seems to be an issue with the rate, Daniel said. His tone remained professional. Firm. Our system shows no error. Maya leaned slightly forward, not challenging, not shrinking. I noticed a double charge online. I just wanted to make sure it was corrected before checkout. Reasonable? Calm. The kind of request the hotel handled daily. Daniel nodded once, already feeling the familiar comfort of certainty. Our billing process is automated. It rarely makes mistakes. Rarely is not never, Maya said gently. Something shifted. Not outwardly, just enough to register. Daniel smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. With respect, ma'am, I've been managing properties like this for over a decade. Guests often misunderstand luxury pricing. Luxury pricing, Maya repeated, her expression unchanged. Yes. Daniel gestured vaguely toward the lobby. The marble. The quiet efficiency. It can be confusing if you are not used to it. Behind him, a younger clerk froze, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Maya noticed. She noticed everything. I understand the rates perfectly, she said. I'm asking about the duplicate charge. Daniel felt the moment stretch. The line behind her grew. A white couple approached the adjacent desk and were greeted warmly, waved through with laughter. No ID requested, no questions asked. Daniel was aware of the optics. He always was. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. If this stay is outside your comfort range, I can recommend several other properties nearby. There it was. Not loud, not explicit, just precise enough to land. Maya met his eyes. For a brief moment, something unreadable passed between them. She believed the system would correct this. He believed the system was already doing its job. I'd like to speak to whoever has final authority here, Maya said. Daniel straightened. You are. The word hung between them. Behind the desk, policy manuals sat neatly stacked. Security cameras blinked their quiet red lights. Everything was in place. Everything was working exactly as designed. Daniel felt certain. Maya did too. And in that certainty, neither of them noticed the smallest warning sign of all, the faint tightening at the corner of Daniel's mouth. The way his gaze lingered a second too long, not on her words, but on her presence. It was a look that lasted less than a second, but it was enough. The dispute stayed small at first. That was the dangerous part. A credit card screen. A line item that did not belong. A charge repeated once too often. The kind of problem that happened every day in places like this and was usually resolved without memory. Maya kept her voice low, even, measured. I just need to understand why the same night appears twice, she said. If it is an error, I am sure it can be corrected. She said it the way she had learned to say difficult things in professional spaces. No accusation, no edge. An invitation for the system to do what it claimed to do. Daniel did not raise his voice either. That was important to him. Our system is automated, he said. It does not double charge without cause. He did not look at the screen again. He did not need to. He trusted it more than he trusted the woman standing in front of him. Maya noticed that, the way his attention moved away from the facts and toward her, the way his answers became statements instead of explanations. "I am not questioning the system," she replied. "I am asking for clarification." Daniel exhaled through his nose. Barely noticeable, but the clerk beside him noticed. The guest waiting behind her noticed. Maya noticed. "Ma'am," he said, leaning back slightly, "we deal with these kinds of concerns often. Guests see a pending authorization and assume they have been charged." "I know the difference between a pending authorization and a posted charge," Maya said. Daniel smiled again. Tighter this time. He could feel eyes on him, staff watching, guests listening without pretending not to, a line forming, momentum shifting away from him. That bothered him more than the charge ever could. He lowered his voice, a move meant to signal control. "Let me be clear, our rates are transparent. If there is confusion, it is usually because the guest is unfamiliar with how premium properties operate." Premium properties. The phrase landed heavier than it should have. Maya felt the instinct rise in her chest, sharp and immediate. The urge to push back, to name what was happening, to say this moment felt uncomfortably familiar. She swallowed it. She had learned long ago that being right did not always mean being believed, that insisting too hard could turn you into the problem, that a calm tone was often treated as a courtesy, not a right. She glanced briefly at the people nearby, a man pretending to check his phone, a couple exchanging looks, the young clerk whose hands had stopped moving entirely. "Do not become the story," she told herself. "I am asking for a supervisor," Maya said quietly. Daniel straightened. "You are speaking to management." Something in his tone hardened then. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to irritation mixed with disbelief. He felt it too. That moment when authority feels thinner than it should, when control depends on the other person backing down. Maya did not. "I would like someone else to review the charge," she said. "That is all." Daniel leaned forward, placing both hands on the counter. His smile vanished. "Look," he said, speaking slowly now, "I am trying to help you, but if you continue to question our policies, you are holding up other guests." The accusation was small, strategic. Maya's stomach tightened. She knew this line. She had heard versions of it in offices and stores and meetings her entire life. The suggestion that her presence was disruptive, that her insistence on fairness was inconvenience. "I am not trying to hold anyone up," she said. "I am trying to resolve a billing issue." Daniel glanced at the clerk beside him, then back at Mia. The look in his eyes was not hostile yet. It was calculating. He believed he was being tested, and he believed that if he gave ground now, he would lose something he might not get back. That belief settled in him like certainty. His voice dropped another notch. "If this stay is outside your budget," he said, "we can cancel the reservation and free the room for other guests." There it was again, clean, polite, cutting. Maya felt heat rise behind her eyes, sharp and unwelcome, not rage, something older, the weight of knowing exactly what he meant without him ever saying it. She looked at him steadily. "That will not be necessary." Daniel nodded once as if a decision had been made for him. In that moment, he was no longer resolving a charge. He was defending a position, a room, a hierarchy he believed was fragile only if challenged. And because he was certain the system stood behind him, because he had never been made to feel otherwise, he allowed himself one more step. A step he would not recognize as a line until it was far too late. In just a few ordinary minutes, he crossed a boundary he did not know existed. Daniel felt the room tightening around him. He noticed it in the silence more than the sound. The way conversations nearby had softened. The way the clerk beside him kept glancing down instead of meeting his eyes. The way Maya stood perfectly still, not retreating, not advancing, forcing him to occupy the space he had already claimed. This was not how these interactions usually went. Usually the guest sighed. Usually they backed down. Usually they accepted the explanation, grateful for the attention, embarrassed for having asked. That was the rhythm he understood. That was the balance that kept everything moving. Maya did none of that. She simply waited. Her hands rested lightly on the counter. Her posture was open, calm, the kind of calm that refused to perform. Daniel mistook it for defiance. "I'm trying to resolve this quickly," he said, though his tone now carried a sharp edge. "But you keep pushing back." "I'm asking a question," Maya replied. "That isn't pushing back." The words were soft. The effect was not. Daniel's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the security desk near the entrance, then back at her. The thought crossed his mind, uninvited and unwelcome. What if she does this on purpose? The idea settled easily. Too easily. Some guests came in looking for a fight. Everyone in hospitality knew that. Some wanted compensation. Some wanted attention. Some wanted to feel important in a place that reminded them they were not. He had handled those guests before, and suddenly, without evidence, without pause, he placed Maya into that category. His voice dropped again, losing warmth entirely. "We have policies for a reason," he said. "If we start making exceptions every time someone claims an error, the system stops working." The system? Maya felt the phrase press against her chest like a closed door. She nodded once. "I agree. That's why I want the charge reviewed." Daniel exhaled sharply. The sound was louder than he intended. A few heads turned. "Ma'am," he said, and now the word carried weight. "I don't know what you're expecting here." What she heard was something else. "I don't know what you think you're entitled to." She considered correcting him, considered explaining who she was, how easily this could end if she chose a different sentence. But she did not come here to be believed because of the title. She came to see what happened when she wasn't. "I'm expecting professionalism," Maya said. Nothing more. Daniel felt his authority slipping, not because she had taken it, but because she had not acknowledged it. That frightened him. He straightened fully now, no longer leaning on the counter. His shoulders squared. His voice rose just enough to carry. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be." The clerk beside him flinched. Maya felt the familiar warning stir in her stomach. The moment when restraint is no longer read as cooperation, but as challenge. "I'm not," she said. "I'm asking for transparency." Daniel laughed once. Short, humorless. "Transparency," he repeated. He looked at her then. Really looked. Not at her words, at her clothes, her posture, her calm, and something ugly crept into his certainty. He leaned closer. "Let me give you some advice," he said quietly. "When you come into a place like this, it helps to understand how things work." The sentence hung between them, heavier than any raised voice. Maya's breath slowed. She felt it then, unmistakably. Not confusion, not misunderstanding, contempt. Around them, the lobby had gone nearly still. No one intervened, no one interrupted. The system, just as both of them believed, was watching. Daniel believed it was watching for order. Maya believed it was watching for fairness. Daniel made his choice without realizing it was a choice at all. He took one more step forward, closing the space that did not belong to him. His tone no longer professional, no longer measured. "If you can't follow our procedures," he said, "maybe this isn't the right environment for you." The words were careful, polite, devastating. Maya looked at him steadily, something shifting behind her eyes. For the first time since she arrived, she spoke without softening her voice. "I will not be spoken to like this." The sentence was calm, final. Daniel felt the room tilt. In that instant, fear took over where confidence had been. Fear of losing face. Fear of being undermined. Fear that the people watching would remember this moment and see him differently. And because he believed the system would shield him, because it always had, he let that fear decide for him. He crossed a line he did not recognize as one, not with anger, not with hatred, but with the certainty that there would be no consequences for disrespect delivered quickly enough. The sound was sharper than anyone expected, not loud, not dramatic, just sudden, final. It cut through the lobby like a dropped plate in a quiet restaurant, the kind of noise that forces every head to turn at once. For a fraction of a second, no one understood what they had just witnessed. Their minds searched for explanations that felt safer than the truth. Then the silence arrived. It pressed down from the high ceiling, heavy and complete. The air itself seemed to stiffen. Conversations died mid-sentence. Footsteps stopped. Even the soft hum of the elevators felt distant, irrelevant. Maya did not move. She felt the heat first, a spreading warmth along her cheek, followed by a tightness she recognized but had hoped never to feel again. Her balance shifted slightly, just enough to notice the marble beneath her heels. She steadied herself without stepping back. She did not raise her hand. She did not speak. She did not react the way the room expected her to. Phones appeared almost instinctively, not rushed, not frantic. Calm hands lifting devices, screens glowing like small witnesses. A guest near the seating area whispered something to her partner and then stopped herself. A clerk inhaled sharply and forgot to exhale. Daniel stood frozen, his arm lowering too slowly, his face still carrying the expression of certainty that had brought him here. It took a moment for the meaning of what he had done to reach him. When it did, it arrived as unease. Not guilt, not yet. Unease. He glanced around, suddenly aware of how many eyes were on him, how many angles there were, how little control he had over what had just escaped his body. Maya lifted her gaze. Her eyes moved calmly across the room, meeting faces that could not decide where to look. Some stared openly, shock written across their expressions. Others looked away quickly, as if the act might attach itself to them if they held it too long. A few watched with something closer to curiosity, the quiet hunger for a story they would later retell. She saw all of it, and still, she did nothing. The lack of response unsettled Daniel more than any shout could have. He had expected outrage, tears, accusation, something he could frame as hysteria or escalation. Instead, he was left alone with the moment. A young employee near the concierge desk shifted her weight, eyes darting between Maya and Daniel. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it. Another staff member stared at the floor, jaw clenched, hands trembling slightly. No one knew what the protocol was for this. Rumors began forming before words did. Someone murmured that the guest must have provoked him. Someone else whispered that she must be important. Did you see how she stood? A bellman leaned toward a coworker and shook his head slowly, as if watching something inevitable rather than preventable. The story was already changing. Maya finally spoke, but her voice was low, almost level with the silence itself. "Take your hand away from me." Daniel stepped back too quickly, his confidence fractured just enough to show through the cracks. He straightened his jacket, glanced toward security, then back at the phone still recording. "This is not what it looks like," he said, the words tumbling out wrong, late, unnecessary. No one answered. The damage had already shifted from skin to space, from action to perception. Maya felt it settle around her, heavier than the heat on her cheek. The distance forming, the invisible line that people drew when deciding what kind of person she would now be allowed to be. Not a woman who had been wronged, a woman who had caused a scene. She understood then with painful clarity that the deepest wound would not be what had happened to her body. It would be what happened to her image. The glances that would follow her, the lowered voices, the quiet recalculations, the way the room would remember her, not for her composure, but for the moment others decided she had become uncomfortable. Daniel felt it too. The system had not rushed to his defense. It had paused, watched, waited. For the first time, he did not feel protected. And in that suspended moment, as the lobby held its breath, something irreversible took shape. Not the act itself, but everything that came after it. The story did not break all at once. It leaked. Clips appeared first, short, cropped, out of order. A few seconds of Maya standing rigid in the lobby. A few frames of raised voices with no context. The silence before the impact, but not what caused it. Never what caused it. By noon, the headlines had decided who she was. Hotel CEO loses control during guest dispute power move, or public meltdown questions raised after mass firings at flagship property. Her name sat beneath those words like an accusation. In boardrooms and newsrooms alike, the same conversation repeated itself. Not what happened, but how it looked. Maya watched it unfold from a distance that felt unreal. Screens showed her face frozen in a moment she barely recognized. Analysts debated her temperament. Commentators speculated about stress, ego, instability. The language softened the harm and sharpened the blame. No one asked why a calm woman would suddenly become dangerous. The board met behind closed doors that afternoon. The call was brief, polite, efficient. "This is becoming a perception issue," one of them said carefully. Another added, "We need to stabilize the narrative." Narrative, not truth. They spoke about brand confidence, investor reassurance, public trust. They spoke about her reactions, her decisions, her tone. They did not speak about his actions. When Maya asked directly whether the full footage had been reviewed, there was a pause long enough to answer without words. "Legal is still assessing," the chair said. But right now, the concern is damage control. Damage control for whom? By evening, a recommendation arrived wrapped in concern. A temporary step back, just until things settle. A cooling off period, for the good of the company. Maya felt something give way inside her then, not loudly, quietly. She thought of the years she had spent building a system she believed could outgrow the people inside it. A system where professionalism would be enough, where restraint would be rewarded, where the rules applied evenly if followed carefully. She saw now how naive that belief had been. Daniel's name appeared in the coverage only as a footnote. An experienced manager, a respected figure, a family long connected to the property, someone under pressure who made a regrettable mistake. A mistake. His family's statements were measured and swift, expressions of concern, emphasis on his character, suggestions that tensions had been mutual, that leadership had overreacted. Their lawyers were already speaking the language of balance. Maya's inbox filled with messages that pretended to be supportive while quietly advising distance. This is getting ugly. Let it cool down. You don't want to look defensive. She understood what they meant. Be silent. Be smaller. Let the system work. Except now she could see the system clearly. It was not built to hold people accountable. It was built to hold power in place. The realization was suffocating. Every instinct told her to explain, to correct the record, to demand fairness. But she had lived long enough to know that explanations were rarely heard from women once a label had been applied, especially not women like her. Late that night, alone in a room that felt suddenly temporary, Maya sat with the weight of it pressing down on her chest. The truth had not failed to exist. It had simply failed to matter. And in that understanding, she reached the lowest point she had ever known. Not because she had been hurt, but because she had been betrayed by the very structure she had trusted to protect others from exactly this moment. The system was not broken. It was working as intended. And that knowledge hurt more than anything that had happened in the lobby. The truth did not arrive like a revelation. It arrived quietly, almost apologetically, as if it had been waiting for permission. Maya was sitting alone in a borrowed office when the knock came. 2 short taps. Hesitation. Then a longer pause, as though whoever stood outside was already reconsidering the decision to speak. "Come in," she said. The woman who stepped inside did not look like someone carrying a secret. Mid-50s, plain cardigan, hotel ID badge still clipped to her belt. Though she no longer worked there, her hands shook slightly as she closed the door behind her. "My name is Evelyn Carter," she said. "I worked front desk at the Ellison Grand for 28 years. Maya gestured for her to sit. Evelyn did not sit right away. She took a breath instead, the kind people take before telling a truth they have learned no one wants. "What happened to you wasn't sudden," Evelyn said. "And it wasn't just him." That sentence landed heavier than anything Maya had heard all day. Evelyn opened her purse and pulled out a thin folder. The edges were worn, the papers inside carefully organized, yellowed with time. "I started keeping notes years ago," she continued. "Little things at first. Who got questioned? Who got flagged? Who got talked to like they were asking for something they didn't deserve?" She slid the folder across the desk. Dates, names, short descriptions written in tight, disciplined handwriting, guest complaints quietly dismissed, employees warned not to escalate certain issues, managers praised for keeping things under control when what they really meant was keeping certain people in their place. Daniel's name appeared more than once. So did others. Maya's chest tightened as she read. "I reported it," Evelyn said softly. "Not once, not twice. I went through proper channels. HR, regional management, corporate reviews. Every time I was told the same thing." She laughed once, bitter and tired. "Be patient. Don't make waves. This industry is delicate. Delicate." More people came forward after that. A bellman who had transferred properties rather than enforce rules that made him uncomfortable. A housekeeping supervisor who had been warned to stop documenting incidents if she wanted to keep her job. A junior manager who quit after being told some guests just require a firmer hand. They brought emails, training materials, performance reviews filled with coded language. Maintains order, strong presence, knows when to push back. It was not random, it was cultivated. Maya sat back slowly, the room tilting as the pattern emerged with brutal clarity. The disrespect had not been a moment of lost control. It had been permission granted over years, permission reinforced by silence, permission protected by outcomes that rewarded those who enforced the unwritten rules and punished those who questioned them. She thought of her own restraint, the times she chose composure over confrontation, the belief that dignity would speak for itself. It never had. The mistake was not trusting the system. The mistake was believing that decency alone could change it. Evelyn's voice trembled as she spoke again. "When I saw the clip of what happened to you," she said, "I knew exactly how it would go. Not because of you, because I've seen how this place protects its own." Maya closed the folder. For the first time since the incident, the pain sharpened into something clearer. Not humiliation, not fear, understanding. The system had not failed her in that moment. It had revealed itself. And with that revelation came the first real lesson she could not unlearn. Respect is not given to those who remain silent forever. It is taken back by those who decide silence is no longer an option. Maya lifted her head. She was done waiting for permission. The confrontation did not come as a single moment. It arrived in waves. Court filings hit first, precise, unemotional, pages of documentation laid out like a quiet indictment, dates, names, patterns that could no longer be explained away as misunderstandings. What had once been whispered now had letterhead and case numbers. Then the media followed. Not the clipped segments this time, but long-form interviews. Independent journalists willing to play the full footage, to let silence sit where it belonged, to ask why so many complaints had vanished before reaching daylight. Community leaders spoke next. Former employees, guests who had learned to lower their voices in places that promised comfort. Their stories overlapped until denial became impossible. Daniel watched it all unravel from the narrow living room of a house that no longer felt permanent. His name, once spoken with authority, was now followed by qualifiers. Former manager, alleged misconduct, ongoing investigation. His family's statements grew shorter, then stopped altogether. The connections he had relied on retreated quietly, each step away framed as prudence rather than betrayal. The hotel released him with a statement that mentioned standards and expectations but avoided apology. The industry followed suit. Invitations disappeared. Calls went unanswered. LinkedIn endorsements quietly removed. His experience, once his armor, became his liability. He told himself it was unfair. He told himself he had only enforced rules. But late at night, when the noise died down, another truth pressed in. He had believed too deeply in protection, in the idea that authority excused tone. That position erased responsibility. The system had taught him that, and now it let him fall alone. Maya stood at the center of the storm and felt no triumph. Press conferences blurred together, questions repeated, support mixed with skepticism. She answered carefully, deliberately, aware that every word would be weighed not just for meaning, but for temperament. Some called her brave. Others called her divisive. She learned how thin that line truly was. The board restructured, policies changed, committees formed, public commitments were made with language polished enough to shine. There were consequences, yes, but they came wrapped in caution. Progress moved slowly, always slowly. At night, when the phone stopped ringing, Maya sat with what she had lost. Not the position, not the power, but the belief that fairness would emerge on its own if given time. She had believed professionalism was armor. She had believed restraint was safety. She had believed systems corrected themselves. Now she knew better. The cost of speaking had been high. The cost of silence had been higher. Daniel lost his standing, his certainty. The future he assumed would continue uninterrupted. Maya lost something quieter, the comfort of believing that doing everything right would protect her from what the system was designed to excuse. There was no clean ending, no moment where balance was restored, and everyone walked away wiser and whole. Only a reckoning that left scars on both sides, and the understanding that some prices are paid, not because we choose them, but because refusing to pay them costs even more. Maya did not disappear. That surprised people. There was no dramatic reinvention, no victory tour, no carefully staged comeback meant to reassure everyone that the world had returned to normal. She simply kept moving forward, one decision at a time, without asking permission to be understood. Some mornings were quiet, almost painfully so. The noise that had once filled her days faded. No emergency calls, no urgent meetings, no voices telling her how to soften her tone or frame her truth. In that silence, She learned something she had never been given space to learn before. She did not need to be perfect to be right. She did not need to be calm to be credible. She did not need to be agreeable to deserve respect. The world did not change overnight. It rarely does. Hotels still polished their language. Boards still weighed optics against accountability. Systems still protected themselves first. The headlines moved on. They always did. But something had shifted underneath. A boundary had been drawn where there had once been fog. A line made visible not by shouting, but by refusal. By the simple act of not shrinking back when the cost of standing still became too high. People began to speak differently in rooms that once relied on silence. Employees documented instead of swallowing. Guests asked questions instead of apologizing for asking. Managers hesitated where they once acted without consequence. It was not justice in its cleanest form, but it was exposure. Maya understood now that systems do not collapse from a single act. They unravel when the beliefs that protect them stop going unquestioned. She walked away carrying less than she had before, less certainty, less illusion, less faith in structures that claimed neutrality while choosing sides. But she also carried something heavier and more honest, clarity. Not about what had been taken from her, but about what could no longer be taken again. She did not look back at the building. She did not need to. Some endings are loud, others arrive quietly and stay. It wasn't the slap that ended everything. It was the belief that disrespect has no consequences. The weeks that followed did not feel like resolution. They felt like weather. Some days were calm, almost deceptively so. Maya would wake early, make coffee, sit by the window, and watch the city move as if nothing had happened. People hurried to work. Buses sighed at corners. The world, indifferent and efficient, continued exactly as it always had. Other days were heavier. Emails arrived from strangers who said they had seen themselves in her silence. Former employees wrote long messages they apologized for sending, explaining things they had never said out loud to anyone before. Older men and women close to retirement confessed that they had learned survival by lowering their eyes and keeping their heads down, and that watching her refuse to do so had unsettled something they thought was already settled inside them. Maya read every message. She did not respond to all of them, not because she did not care, but because she had learned something else the hard way. You cannot carry everyone's healing without losing your own. What stayed with her were the quiet changes. The ones no headline would ever track. A junior manager who delayed a decision thinking twice about tone. A staff handbook rewritten in plain language instead of legal fog. A training session where someone asked out loud why certain rules always seem to fall harder on certain people. Small moments, ordinary moments, the kind that only exist because someone made discomfort unavoidable. Maya never claimed to have fixed anything. She was careful about that. Grand declarations were tempting, but they were also dishonest. Systems did not become fair because one person endured something unfair. They changed only when enough people decided the cost of silence had finally outweighed the cost of speaking. What she had done was simpler and more difficult than reform. She had refused to absorb disrespect quietly, and that refusal echoed. She learned to live with what she had lost. The sense of safety she once associated with titles and procedures never fully returned, but in its place grew something steadier, a trust in her own judgment, even when it led her into conflict, even when it made people uncomfortable, even when it cost her rooms she would never be invited back into. She stopped measuring her worth by how well she navigated systems that were never built for her protection. Instead, she measured it by how honestly she could see them. At a small gathering months later, someone asked if she regretted not handling things differently. The question was polite, almost sympathetic, the kind designed to offer an exit ramp back to respectability. Maya thought about it for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "No," she said. "I regret believing that being careful would keep me safe." That answer made the room quiet. She understood now that growth rarely felt like progress while it was happening. It felt like loss. Like friction, like being misunderstood by people who preferred the old arrangement because it worked well enough for them. But justice had never been about comfort. It was about consequence. Not the loud kind, not the immediate kind, but the kind that lingers, that forces reflection long after the moment has passed, that changes how people move, speak, decide. The disrespect that day had taken only minutes. It had not ended a career or a company or a life. It had ended something far more dangerous. The belief that power could wound without cost. The belief that silence was a virtue rather than a strategy imposed. The belief that dignity belonged only to those who knew when to stay quiet. Maya stepped into the next chapter of her life without a script, without guarantees, without the illusion that doing everything right would protect her from being wronged. She stepped forward with her eyes open, and that, she knew now, was the real ending. Not revenge, not redemption, but awareness that could not be taken away. It wasn't the slap that ended everything. It was the belief that disrespect has no consequences.